Hey, it's Patti Scharf, CPA and co-founder of Catching Clouds, the leader in e-commerce accounting. Welcome back to another Saturday Slowdown where I like to remind everybody to work on their business and not just in their business. Last week I was talking about the importance of having something else to focus on while you're hustling that is not directly related to hustling. Things that give balance to your life and things like that. And one of the things that's important to me is to always be learning. And because of that, I like listening to podcasts. So Scott and I were actually talking about this the other day, and we were saying, there are just all these great e-commerce, business, and accounting podcasts out there, actually more than we really have time to listen to all the time. But we thought it might be helpful if I put together a list of our favorite 8 accounting, e-commerce, and business podcasts. So here we go. All right, so these are not in any kind of particular order. Really, what I like listening to depends on what kind of mood I'm in. If it's late in the week, I kind of tend to slow down and I want to listen to something a little bit lighter, or if I'm just kicking off my week, or I want to get into the mood for thinking about what I'm going to be doing my YouTube videos on or something like that, I'll listen to something different at the beginning of the week than in the end of the week. The first one on my list is the Ecommerce Crew e-commerce podcast. This is hosted by Michael Jackness and Dave Bryant. And Scott and I actually had a chance to meet Michael Jackness. He's kind of a giant actually in the e-commerce seller world. So if you're not listening to this and you are an e-commerce seller, you really probably should be listening to this. But we got a chance to meet Mike Jackness at the Ecommerce Fuel live event in January of last year. In 2018, we were having dinner together and things like that. And he's a great guy with great information. Podcast is great. And actually, if you look down below in our information section in the YouTube video, there's a link to an interview that he did with Scott about a month or so ago. So make sure you check that out. Next up is the Ecommerce Fuel podcast by Andrew Udarian. He actually created the community Ecommerce Fuel. This is basically a community for 7-figure sellers, people who are selling online and making 7 figures and up. And it's a great group of people. It's a very large group actually. And they've got so many stories and insights, and I love how Andrew, he's just very down to earth and takes a practical approach to different things, but he really cares deeply about keeping e-commerce sellers informed of what's going on in the world and talking about things that affect them and doing like studies on how the industry is changing from year to year and different things. So I really enjoy listening to his podcast, and you should absolutely learn from people who have come before you and check that out if you haven't already. Next up on my list is From the Trenches, and this is hosted by David Boyer and Paul Meisner. Scott and I actually got to meet Paul Meisner in person last, 3 months ago or so, down in Melbourne when we were there. And we had a great time. We had dinner and a bunch of beers, and one of the things that I really like about the podcast is they are very authentic in their opinions. They say it like it is, and they're really part of the accounting industry. They know what's going on. They've got their finger on the pulse of what's going on, and they give you the unvarnished truth from their perspective. And I think it's a good podcast to listen to. Next up is also from Australia, the Cloud Stories podcast by Heather Smith. This one, it's not as consistent as I would like. It's not like an every week on the dot kind of podcast that gets dropped. It's only now and again. But if you don't know, Heather Smith is just the queen bee of cloud accounting apps. She's got all kinds of information. She's got all kinds of connections. And the information she has on her podcast, it's really well thought out, well presented, and informative. So I like to know what's going on in the world, and she offers great insight. So I like listening to that when I get a chance. Next up is the Ferriss Show. If you don't know who Tim Ferriss is, you are kind of out of the loop. Tim Ferriss, I kind of feel like, I mean, he's probably younger than me. I'm pretty sure he's younger than me, but he's kind of the grandfather of the e-commerce seller industry. He wrote the book, The 4-Hour Workweek. It's been probably 15 years, certainly more than 10 years, because I think I read it in 2007. So probably 15 years ago is roughly when he wrote this, when the e-commerce world was just kind of getting started, and he talked about how to build an e-commerce business and things like that. But since then, he's just become this international kind of superstar. He knows everybody everywhere. He hosts people on his show all the time and interviews them, and they are fascinating interviews and really long. When we were in New Zealand, we were driving around the South Island for about 3 weeks, and the bulk of that time that we were in the car was spent listening to his podcasts. So very insightful, very interesting. He talks to really fascinating people, and it's well worth your listen. Next up is the Cloud Accounting Podcast. This is hosted by David Leary and Blake Oliver, and this is far and away my favorite accounting podcast. It's very insightful. They curate news and content, current information, but they have really deep understanding of the industry, and they offer a lot of insights into what's going on in the accounting world, and it's way more interesting than you might otherwise think. They make it not only palatable, I'd say, for like non-accountants and accountants both, but they actually make it kind of fun and interesting too. So if you haven't listened to that, I recommend you give that a listen. Next up is a podcast that I don't know of anybody else who listens to this but me, but it's called The Sunny Show, and it's hosted by Sunny Lenarduzzi. She is kind of a rock star in the marketing and certainly YouTube world. She kind of really gained popularity with her videos on YouTube about how to be successful on YouTube. And she's kind of a marketing guru, and she just within the last, I want to say, 7 months or so, started her own podcast, and it's just as good as her YouTube channel. So I would recommend that if you have any interest in promoting your business on YouTube, or if you're a business owner at all, you should be listening to this, because she talks a lot about the struggles being an entrepreneur. She talks about her own personal struggles, but she also talks about, how to get 1 million views and all the other stuff that, like, all the how-tos that a lot of people want to hear about. So I'm kind of a fan. She's got a great personality, and this is a fun podcast to listen to. And last but not least, I want to give a shout out to this podcast. It's really less of a podcast, more of a consistent Facebook live show that they will record, and then they'll upload it so that it becomes a podcast. But I don't think it's created specifically for the podcast part. But anyway, it's called Friday Night Live with accountants Hector Garcia, Michael Lee, and Andrew Wall. And they often have guests on their show, and they will talk about anything from QuickBooks to diversity in the industry to SEO to whatever's going on. They talk about that every Friday night over beers or whatever they happen to be drinking. And it's very informative and very interesting, and I think you should check that out too. So those were my top 8. I actually listened to quite a few others kind of here and there, but I don't have time to listen to all of them. So tell me, what is your favorite podcast? Tell me down below in the comments. I'm always interested in hearing about new shows and things that I haven't visited yet. So, and I'm sure other people will be too. So give us a shout out. Tell us which ones are your favorites. And I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please like, comment, and share. If you haven't already, please subscribe, and I'll catch you later.